Hi, Marcela Hurtado. How are you today? This is your class observation feedback video. And based on the focus area you chose in the stage one, I will give you the feedback based on the data I gather and based on the things I observed during the stage three of this project. So the two focus areas chosen by you in stage one were teaching methodology and formative and summative assessment. And also our mentor teacher identified one special need based on the first observation that was students' interactions. So based on these three focus areas, I will give you the feedback regarding the second observation class we had in stage three of this project. So let's start first with the focus area number one, which is teaching methodology. During the class, you promoted teamwork. It was a good strategy that you created 5 groups inside the class. The way you introduced the present perfect tense allowed students to enjoy the competition activities, and at the same time, they infer the grammar in an inductive way. This was a very, very good thing I identified based on the methodology you use in the class, because you are a very, very inductive teacher, and all the way you introduce the grammar and the content of the classes was always using the inductive approach. Based on this, I will give you feedback, and something that I like about your teaching practice was that you design your class activities and tasks using a very inductive approach. As I told you, the activities you designed motivated the students a lot. They participated, they enjoyed and inferred the past of the verbs. Also, something that I consider would be important when designing your class, it could be including digital mediation tools or sources. For example, Kahoot, Quizizz, Padlet, Quizlets, Mentimeter activities, among others. I think that maybe if you try to include inside your lesson plans and inside your activities some digital mediation sources would allow the students to enjoy and to learn by having fun, by having some games or activities in which they can use even though their mobile phones or ICT sources that they have in class. Now about some recommendations, I think that it will be very important you to reflect on the following questions I'm going to mention. The first one is, have you considered including ED ending explanation by using the voiceless or voice rules? This would help students to differentiate the t sound, the d sound, and the it sound, and the ways of articulation. I think that you can maybe Google or go to YouTube and to write there voice and voiceless ED endings, and maybe by introducing these rules, the students will be or would have an easier way to understand to produce the ED endings of the regular verbs because I found sometimes that students had some difficulties in the way of pronouncing the ED endings of the activities you designed in the class I was in. And the second question would be, have you tried the strategy of creating some written prompts on the board? I believe that if you would have designed some prompts or models, those prompts could benefit students to produce speaking sentences related to the experiences during the last month. I think that if you provide students like a model, how to use that model, I think they would produce their own oral products or oral discourses following those models. I think you should really include more meaningful and real and monitor speaking tasks inside your lessons, just to allow the students to not only to understand the grammar and to participate on the activities you design, but also on producing real and meaningful oral discourses. Now let's focus our attention on the second focus area, that was formative and summative assessment. First, I observed that the strategies you use for monitoring and giving feedback to students regarding the matching cards game were very, very meaningful and allowed students to receive teachers' feedback regarding the way they pronounce and wrote the verbs in past. This was something very good. I liked it. The way you included, some gamification activities inside your lesson plans just to monitor and to evaluate them, and at the same time to give them feedback. Now I have like some reflecting questions, and the first one would be: have you tried on including Kahoot, Quizlet, Quiz activities to monitor and evaluate students' comprehension of the grammar content of the class? I think that, or I observed also, that most of the students were using their mobile phones, and sometimes they were not paying attention to the things you were just working in the class. And I think that it would be very important just to observe what our students are doing in the class and try to incorporate in the lesson plan some digital mediation sources, because students are crazy about screens. They love to work all the time with their mobile phones, and I observed they were very focused on their phones inside the class. So I think that these tools will allow you to monitor if they are understanding or not the topics given, and at the same time they will be able to practice the content given, and you would have an opportunity to evaluate them summatively, because all these digital mediation sources have like immediate and instant feedback regarding the topic and the content, even though you can design the activities or you can just take some of them that are already set in those sources. Some recommendation that I would give you regarding this second focus area is that I think that if you create some written prompts on the board and then ask students to produce a personal experience using the present perfect topics following the given model, they could create real spoken discourses, and the grammar learned during the class would be more meaningful for them. You could use this activity to evaluate them summatively and formatively. So I think that one way of asking them to produce real speaking discourses is by creating models, explaining the models, and ask them to follow the models just to create their own discourses. So my recommendation would be, based on the way you evaluate your students, is create prompts or models, ask them to follow the models, and then to produce their own discourses. Now, also our mentor teacher chose another focus area that he identified was very or was a need for you. So something I'm sorry. This focus area was the students' interactions, and something that you could include in your lesson plans could be encouraging students to produce oral discourses that they can create by themselves just by following the prompts I mentioned before. I think that if you include prompts or models inside your lessons and inside your classes, students can create more meaningful and real life oral products, and at the same time you will foster interactions in the second language. I recommend you also that you design the tasks or the activities of the class that allow the students to interact among them, because sometimes they were a little bit shy and just was a teacher talking time and activity. So one way that to generate interactions patterns might be by designing an unexpected model, as I told you. So students, after you present the model, they can rehearse using the model, and then you're going to ask them by themselves to create their own products, even though they are oral or they are written products. So just to foster a student's interaction is by designing models or prompts inside your classes. And my recommendation is that you can plan these models maybe in a presentation PowerPoint, or maybe in a Peer Deck, or maybe in a Canvas source, and then in the class you just monitor and facilitate the learning processes you already plan in advance. And based on this, I have some questions, some reflecting questions also, based on the students' interactions focus area. And the first one would be, have you reflected on the importance of creating interactions among students? If not, I recommend you to include these kind of tasks inside your lesson plans to allow the students to use the grammar and the content learned during the classes, not only to understand the grammar, not only to understand the content, but to use the grammar you are working with them in the classes. One way of doing this is by monitoring if they are achieving the suggested basic learning rates per grade and per module during the assessment stages. I think that you have to bear in mind if students are achieving or not the basic learning rates per grade, right? And based on this feedback, the action plan I recommend you for next year is to focus your attention on the students' interactions and also on the use of materials. Based on the students' interactions, you must include inside your lesson plans prompts and models that serve students to follow, use, and create their own speaking discourses. And regarding the use of materials, you need to include inside your lesson plans digital mediation sources such as Kahoot, Quizizz, Quizlet, Mentimeter, among others. This would be my recommendation maybe for next year in the first term. So this was like the feedback I planned for you based on the data I collected in the class. Thank you for allowing me to be in your class. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.